We do want to get into some of these more international headlines, updates on the war in Ukraine. Well, some domestic politics, you could argue, getting in the way of wartime there as Ukraine prosecutes its war against Russian aggression. This is what we know. Ukraine's parliament today passed legislation that would tighten oversight of two key anti-corruption agencies. Now, critics say that would significantly weaken their independence. It would give President Volodymyr Zelensky's circle greater sway over some of these corruption investigations. Fox's reporter there and correspondent Greg Palcott from London has more on this story. Let's listen.
Another night of relentless Russian airstrikes on Ukraine as the peace process slowly moves forward. On Wednesday, negotiators from both countries will meet face-to-face for the first time in 7 weeks. But the Kremlin has a laundry list of demands that are non-starters for Ukraine, including withdrawal of Ukrainian troops from territories it captured, new elections in Ukraine, and a promise the country will never join NATO.
Ukraine can't come to a deal like that, nor would the United States. And that's why this thing has been so challenging and why the president's frustrated.
But it's still not clear how much pressure the U.S. is willing to put on Russia. President Trump set a 50-day deadline for a ceasefire, but Russian attacks have only intensified since then, prompting Ukrainian officials to plead for more help.
Putin is only afraid of Trump. He understands that only the United States of America can force them to make peace.
The U.S. recently resumed military aid shipments to Ukraine, and the two countries are reportedly close to signing a so-called weapons mega deal. But with the future of American aid still uncertain, other NATO allies say they'll step up and help fill the gap.
We Europeans need to ramp up our defense capabilities, not only because Americans have been demanding us to do so since long ago, but also because we see a clear and present danger.
Germany and the U.S. say they are working together to deliver 5 new Patriot air defense systems to Ukraine as soon as possible. In London, Greg Palcott, Fox News.
Greg, thanks so much. In the meantime here, let's bring into the conversation national security analyst and expert and retired Marine intelligence officer Hal Kempfer. He joins me. Hal, good to be with you here. Just want to start with this story because it is somewhat interesting that, yes, domestic politics can get in the way of even a country during wartime. We also, Hal, have some of this video of some of these protests in some of these Ukrainian cities. This one here in downtown Kyiv right here. So let's just, for the viewers, kind of go back. How did we get here? So according to the Associated Press, the changes there would grant the prosecutor general new authority over investigations and cases handled by these two agencies. One, the National Anti-Corruption Bureau of Ukraine and the Specialized Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office. Now, on Monday, Ukraine's domestic security agency detained 2 NABU officials on suspicion of links to Russia and searched other agency employees on unrelated allegations. Under the law, Ukraine's prosecutor general will have sweeping powers over the NABU and the special anti-corruption prosecutor. The prosecutor general is appointed by the president, effectively giving Zelenskyy power to block investigations into members of his administration. Is this a power grab by Zelenskyy? Is this a misstep by Zelenskyy here? How do you read this, Hal?
Andrew, if you look at the protesters on the streets, they see it as a degradation of the independence of these anti-corruption bureaus. NABU and SAPO, both of these are relatively independent bureaus. They were put in place in 2015 because, be frank, Ukraine had a long history of public corruption. That's one of the problems that Zelensky's been working through is still dealing with corruption, even in the midst of war, dealing with corruption, dealing with military acquisition process with corruption in the midst of this major war. So they have some deeply ingrained corruption issues that they've been addressing. Now, what this does, as has been pointed out, is it puts it under the prosecutor general. Now, the problem there is that's a political appointment, and the feeling is that the dominant party, and keep in mind they don't have elections now because they're in martial law, that Zelensky's party essentially politically now controls these two bureaus. That's one side. The other side is what Zelenskyy says. And what Zelenskyy is saying is, hey, they have been infiltrated by Russia. They have been influenced. And that's a kind of an interesting charge. I'd like to see more evidence presented on that as to what exactly they're talking about. But the reason it's interesting is, A, it is possible, and B, because they were so independent, they can get access to a lot of different things. And if I was a Russian intelligence officer, if I was, in the FSB, I might target those two entities, because if I could get sources in there, they have tremendous access across all the government. So I'm not saying that is, obviously the protesters think that's just an excuse, but actually there is some sense to that. And the reason it jumps out at me is how fast it happened.
Okay.
This literally went from the morning, as nobody knew it was going to happen, to the afternoon where it actually passed. One house had actually passed the bill, and they thought it was a fait accompli that this was going to be done. And it moved so fast, it's like, I almost had the feeling that maybe Zelenskyy is pointing to something. Obviously, he doesn't want to talk about the extent of it, but it moved so fast that somewhere behind closed doors, they decided this had to be done, and basically said, in so many words, damn the political torpedoes, full speed ahead.
Okay, so you and I have talked a lot during the course of this war about some of these Ukrainian officials, some appointed, some elected, who later it was revealed did have Russian sympathies, have pro-Russian allegiances, and they were held accountable, either fired from their posts or arrested for whatever, what have you here. But Zelenskyy ascended to the top spot there in Kyiv on an anti-corruption platform. He said he's not going to veto this piece of legislation. He ran on rooting out corruption. You and I both know, viewers know, Ukraine wants to be in NATO. Ukraine wants to be in the European Union. In order for those membership bids to get green-lighted, they have to show proof that some of these anti-corruption measures are having an effect in Ukraine. What now?
Well, the problem they have now is, and you're already starting to hear this burble up really fast from the European Union side. They said, hold on. You've just undermined the independence, the integrity of these anti-corruption elements that were set up in part to pave the way for accession into the European Union and, of course, eventually accession into NATO. And that has to be in place. There are very stringent requirements to join both of these organizations, and anti-corruption measures are a part of that. They have to have that integrity in the system in order to be part of it. So what this has done is two things. Number one, it set them back. They're not on a road right now because of this. I don't see the EU moving forward on this because they're going to say, look, this has to be resolved. Number two, even if it was quickly reversed, and keep in mind, it's not completely done yet, but if it was quickly reversed, it would then extend the amount of time that they'd say, hey, look, what did you do when you had the safeguards or the independence down? Did you politicize the system? Did you open the door for more corruption? There's a lot of questions that the EU and NATO will have down the road as far as what was being done.
Okay.
On the other hand, though, is it possible that what Zelensky's alluding to, which would be a pretty significant counterintelligence failure, if you will, that Russia had infiltrated these organizations and were using them to collect intelligence or do other things? I really do think that that's something that needs to be looked at. I don't think President Zelenskyy just doesn't throw stuff out there. I've listened to this guy very closely, particularly over the last 3+ years.
Right.
He's not one to throw away phrases. Putin, I don't believe anything Putin ever says, but Zelenskyy, he actually does not make this stuff up because he knows he will be held to account and he'll be held to Western standards. And so I do think there might be something to that.
So, Hal, lastly, how does this affect Ukraine's prosecution of the war? If you have public dissent, if you have Ukrainians protesting in the streets, is that a distraction? Can they keep their eye on the ball? Can they walk and chew gum at the same time? Remember, before October 7th and in the wake of October 7th, there on the streets of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Israelis en masse stopped protesting. the judicial reforms that were percolating throughout the country, and they came together in the wake of the Hamas terror attack. I'm not making apples to apples comparisons here, but can a country face public dissent and protest like this and still operate during a war?
Well, what I will say, yeah, I do think they can, depending on how ingrained the protest movement is. Again, I think President Zelenskyy and his party, or at least his cabinet, has to make a case, and they're going to have to. It may be difficult, but they're going to have to kind of reveal what were you alluding to? What was the cause that led to what was done here? They're going to have to make that case to the Ukrainian people. Now, can you have protests on the streets and still prosecute a war? Yes, but I will tell you, if I was in the Kremlin and I was doing information operations or disinformation operations and looking at Ukraine, I would look at this as a gift and say, okay, we're going to use this every way we can to, to hammer home the narratives that it's a corrupt regime.
Okay.
Somehow I'll twist that into what they love to say is that it's a neo-Nazi regime or something like that. So they're going to use this and that does weaken them to a certain extent, certainly with those who listen to Russian propaganda. And it won't be just Russia. There are others who Russia will use to do this as well.
Okay.
And frankly, it may show up. There are some who, who are fairly pro-Russian in far right side of the U.S. So they may listen to that, and it may get a lot of spin.
All right, Hal Kempfer, we're going to have to leave it at that. Thanks so much for your insight. Yet another wrinkle in this story. We'll talk soon.